Good evening. I'm Sam Blake, crime author and founder of Murder One, and we're delighted this year to be teaming up with Unreliable Libraries and the fabulous LexIcon Library in Dún Laoghaire to bring you Murder One in the Library, a series of events and crime writing masterclasses that bring you inside some of the most exciting crime novels that are out today. Welcome to our very first event. We can't be in the library right now, but online events mean that we can fit more people into the room and nobody has to worry about parking. So there are some very big advantages. Tonight, we're kicking off with an absolutely stellar panel. Adele Parks is the author of 20 best-selling novels, including the recent Sunday Times #1 hits Lies, Lies, Lies and Just My Luck. And she's sold 4 million books in the UK and been translated into 31 languages. Adele's lived in Botswana, Italy and London and has now settled in Guildford with her husband, son and cat. Very important. Writers' cats are very important. Both of You is Adele's 21st book in 21 years and brings her to the dark side. Jane Casey, many of you know, she's the author of the best-selling and award-winning Maeve Kerrigan detective series, which are based in London, but as you can tell from Maeve's name, she's got very strong Irish roots. And Jane herself is Irish and she lives in London, and she's married to a criminal barrister who's also a special constable, I think still is, Jane. So she has unique access to the criminal world. Sunday Times top 10 best-selling author, and her #1 bestseller, which is her first standalone thriller, is set in the legal world, and it's called The Killing Kind, and it's excellent. It's out now. And holding our event together this evening is Vaseem Khan, who is the author of 2 crime novels set in India, the Baby Ganesh agency series set in modern Mumbai, and the Malabai House historical crime novel set in 1950s Bombay. He's translated into 15 languages and has won some very big awards, including the Seamus Award in the US and the Crime Writers Association Historical Dagger. His latest book is A Dying Day. It's about the theft of one of the world's greatest treasures, a 600-year-old copy of Dante's Divine Comedy stored in Bombay's Asiatic Society. And if you love atmosphere and location and a damn good plot, Vaseem is your man. And significantly for us this evening, his female protagonist, Inspector Persis Wadia, I probably mispronounced that, is India's first female detective. So Vaseem, it's over to you and our Deadly Women.
Thank you, Sam, for that stellar introduction. I'm looking over my shoulder to see who you're actually describing, but thank you very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Murder One Festival, and welcome to the very provocatively entitled session, Deadly Women. I am joined by 2 very charming, very deadly women, whereas I, of course, am just brave as one. I shall be quizzing them, according to the blurb, on the what, where, how, and why women make such compelling lead characters. I can't promise that we won't digress, for instance, into discussing why men are so useless. It's as the old joke goes, what do you call a man with half a brain? Gifted. Welcome, Adele, and welcome, Jane.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
How deadly are you feeling today, ladies?
Pretty deadly. I don't know. I'm not really. I'm most deadly when I'm writing. At the moment, I'm sort of charming and, promoting. So I'm less deadly at that stage, I feel.
I'm never going to admit of anything. No, I'm not going to admit that I'm deadly in any way. I'm just going to pretend to be sweet and nice.
Well, the fact that you've not been convicted doesn't preclude the possibility that you haven't been put on trial for something. So
that's actually no, right? That is something that has not happened yet.
Fair enough. Right, let's dive straight in. Let's talk about your books. So why don't we start with the elevator pitches for your current novels? Let's start with you, Jane. Let's start with The Killing Kind. The Killing Kind, sorry.
Well, The Killing Kind is about a young female barrister who becomes convinced that someone is trying to murder her, largely because one of her colleagues is murdered in her place. And there's an obvious suspect, which is the man who has stalked her for several years after she represented him on a harassment charge and successfully defended him against the accusations. Then he transferred his attentions to her. So firstly, she thinks that he might be the person behind the attacks on people around her. And then she thinks that maybe she can make use of him, whether he is or not, so that she can find out more about what he's been doing.
Fantastic. Since you haven't held it up, here's a copy of your book.
Oh, yeah, I do actually have it. I should, at this stage, I should know how to do this. I should be ready. Anyway, beautiful. The umbrella is a plot point. This is important to say.
Indeed. Adele, tell us about both of you.
I feel I ought to stretch for mine at this point and say this is both of you. So it's a story about two women who go missing from their homes within 1 week of each other. So they both live in London. Lee is a stepmom of two. She works as a management consultant, very busy life, spends half the time up in Scotland, married to a horticulturist, is sort of quite ordinary and relatable. And I say ordinary with great respect. I think if we get through life being relatively ordinary, we've done pretty well. She goes to work one day and just doesn't come home, leaves behind a devastated family, very confused family. Kai is a very different woman. She lives with her younger, incredibly wealthy, very handsome, great to write husband. They haven't got any children, they're child free, they live in a luxury pent apartment. But because the way London is, they're actually only a very short distance away from each other physically, just a couple of miles away from each other. But, you know, in terms of lifestyle, light years away. Both women go missing. The female DC on the case feels at a gut level that the missing case is linked. The story is, you know, what have they run away from or towards? What is the connection? I mean, I don't think I'm giving a lot away to say there is a connection. I mean, it would make a very, very slight book. There had been no connection at this point. There is a connection between the two women, and the book is about where are they? Will they come back? As I say, what have they run? What's the threat? It's really difficult to talk about because that setup is an entire lie. I'm just telling you now. I mean, that is the setup, but you find quite early on that nothing is what it seems. But I can't tell you why nothing is what it seems, else you wouldn't even get to the first third.
I can vouch for that with both of your books. There are twists and turns galore, and it's just horrible that you're so both disgustingly talented. Right. So let me stay with you. Let me stay with you, Adele. So your protagonists, Lee and Kai, they follow in the tradition of unreliable female narrators in psychological noir. And it's a genre that's been riding the crest of a wave for over a decade now, since Gone Girl took the world by storm. Why? Why are we endlessly fascinated by these unreliable female narrators?
Yeah, I mean, you made a very fun joke at the beginning, saying, you know, half a brain, what's a man with half a brain talent? But the truth is, huge generalization. Please do not, I was going to say, please do not send me complaint emails, but send me complaint emails, I'm fine with it. But huge generalization. Yeah, and I'll get them anyway. Huge generalization. Women think we understand men. We may be wrong, but we think we get it. We think you're more simple and we can get it. Not necessarily right as Vaseem. So, you know, generally speaking, as a, you know, like a gender, we think we get them. Where men constantly go, well, I don't get women, I don't understand them. So we're already more interesting. Women are fascinated by their friends. Our relationships with other females are really, really important to us. I think we do like that. So just on a really basic level, we're keeping a very broad audience there by giving a female that's unreliable and mysterious and difficult. Men and women buy into that and kind of go, yeah, okay, I expect not to understand women. I will give that a chance. I will believe that. So I think that's possibly part of it. Maybe there's a bigger sort of socio-political part of it too, which is less flattering, that women historically are seen as less trustworthy. Maybe actually the truth is we have had to be less trustworthy for generations because we've been fighting a different fight. You know, women are, we're not the gender on top. But very inexplicable reasons, can't get it myself, but we're not, you know, the force and the sort of power physically and financially for generations until relatively recent history has been with men. So therefore, maybe women have had to resort to more wily ways. And now we're finally, in very recent history, having a voice for that. And that's fun. I mean, for all of that sounds super like big and serious, you know, which it is. It's fun having an unreliable narrator and thinking you're getting to know someone. and then suddenly thinking, gosh, she may not be everything she seems. And maybe it's not such a shock when men are unreliable. That's a bit of a dig.
Well,
Sorry.
Well, you're right. It is fun. I mean, reading both of your books, that untrustworthiness that comes through, it's what gives the novel impetus. It's what makes you want to keep turning the pages, because in real life, if people are quite bland and nothing wrong, as you said at the beginning, with being very ordinary and bland, but it's not very good in fiction. But taking that forward to you, Jane, now, so that flaw, that untrustworthiness, or flaws in general. Now, your lead character, she's a very accomplished woman, Ingrid Lewis. She's a driven, successful barrister, but she's not without her flaws, right? She's made mistakes in the past. How difficult is it to want to build in those flaws for a character who presumably inspires you?
Well, I think when I came up with Ingrid, she sort of fits into the pantheon of characters that I usually write about. She's a woman who's dealing with her career in a slightly different way than she would if she was a man. It's something that always interests me, in the way that, people have to make different compromises based on who they are. So she is a very hardworking young woman. She has a lot of background detail that comes out through the book, where initially you think that maybe the circumstances are one thing, and then almost as she thinks about it, she confronts a few uncomfortable truths about things that she's done in the past, and things that were technically okay, but maybe morally questionable. I think that it's something that really interests me, how, I think the thing that always fascinates people about barristers is how they can defend someone who is not, on the face of it, either likable or worthy of, a great deal of effort. And yet that's the job. And it's a really important job to do so that justice is done. But are there compromises that you make if you are putting your talents to that kind of use? Do you have to put certain things aside? Is it different for a woman to do it than for a man? Is there a kind of a sisterhood question that comes up very strongly in the book, whether she owes more than she has given to the victims of crime? So it was really fascinating to get to write about her and to get to present her as one thing, and then delve a little bit deeper into her character. And again, I think she's sort of been fooling herself for quite a long time. So to bring her to face reality was great fun dramatically in writing the book.
Well, you do bring to life the way that your lead character approaches being a barrister, and I think I read somewhere that's you do a lot of that research at home, right? Is it your husband or brother? Was it a husband?
My husband, so, yeah. He's a barrister.
You know what, right? Behind every great woman, there is a man. No, they don't say that. Obviously, they say the exact opposite. But Adele.
Okay. I was just going to say, in fairness, behind this great-ish woman, there is a great man. I think it's interesting that I'm not one for sort of saying what the differences between humans are. I'm one for sort of saying what we've got in common. And the unreliable narrator has been around forever. It's now being voiced more through a female, but we have had unreliable narrators that have been men, and equally we've had reliable females, reliable males. It's not I don't think either of us ever write where we're sort of trying to divide male to female. I just think there's something a bit exciting about having a deadly woman.
And Jane, do you have any comment on that?
No, I mean, I think I would be very slow to write a book with a man at the heart of it. I think partly because I don't think that I could necessarily do a good job on it. I think, I don't know, I see the world in a particular way, and I think that's probably something that comes through in my fiction, especially because I write first person fiction, so it's always from the point of view of the main character. So I have toyed with it in the past, but I think it is quite different sometimes how people approach the world. And I think one of the things that interests me about women and writing women is that they don't necessarily get to take the straightforward route in dealing with problems. That they sometimes have to think of a clever way of doing it because they're not as strong, they're not as, physically. I mean, they're not going to be able to fight their way out of trouble necessarily. So they have to think a little bit harder. So.
Well, you say that. When I began my Malabar House series with India's first female policewoman, I did have to have quite a few discussions, not just with myself, but with my editor, etc., to work out, how I was going to represent this woman. And I went away from the idea of doing it in first person, which was my initial instinct, because for that very reason, because as you've just outlined, it's quite difficult to go into a first person narrative of a different gender. But overall,
I've done it with a number of my books. I haven't written a book where it's been, entirely male first person, but I've written a number of psychological thrillers where I've had a chapter from female point of view, male point of view. It might be that the female is third and person and the male is first person. I actually think I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I do run it by lots of men to just check, but I mean, I've lived on this planet with men and with lots of, with everybody. Well, also I'm aware that there's, that there's lots of people, there are lots of ways people can identify with gender. So I don't believe we should narrow and limit ourselves to only writing from our own points of view, because in the end we'll be silenced, because I've only actually lived one life. But the joy of writing 21 novels is I get to live 50, 60, 70 lives, because I can have multiple people. So well done, you.
I should say, Vaseem, you do it really well. And I don't have a problem with people doing it.
What do these men say, Adele?
For me personally.
What do these men... Carry on, Jane.
I was just going to say, for me personally, what interests me is how women relate to the world. And so that's what I tend to write about. But I like men.
I was just wondering, Adele, what these men say when you run these books past them. More beer and more burping.
Well, I write. Not one of my processes when I write my novel. When I'm halfway through, I read it aloud to my husband, who is the most transparent man ever. Like, I can see when he's going, and think, right, edit, that comes out. Or he's also very, very precise. We're quite different skill sets. So he will say something like, well, that journey up the M1 takes longer. Thanks for that. But it actually is relatively useful, and I'm very glad of that. And I just know we've been together 20 years. I know that when I am trying to communicate with him and I'm full on for like several hours of discussing something, I get 30-minute slots. So I kind of know that is how he thinks. So when I'm writing my male characters, I have that in my mind. He doesn't, I suppose he must burp, tries not to burp too much in front of me, and he doesn't drink. So I don't suppose he's particularly not like average anyhow. But yeah, so he's really good. I read it at halfway point and then edit, and then I read it when it's finished. And reading aloud is good as the process anyhow, whoever you read it aloud to, because you do see if you've written this sort of idea before and just doubled up in the book or something like that. And it just helps you hold the thing together, because I read it aloud in usually 48 hours, maybe a bit longer, sometimes sort of, 60 hours. But I read it in that sort of process and in that time frame. So I can see if it's got momentum, and it works. I do. Fantastic. I'm laughing at one example of so a flawed male I wrote in the book Lies, 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 another psychological thriller. He was an alcoholic. As I say, my husband doesn't drink at all. So there's more nuance, isn't there? But anyway, I'm getting off topic because it's not about deadly. Let's get back to Deadly Women. Sorry.
Let's move on. Let's move on with our questions. So, in the vast majority of crime fiction, men are the villains, right? And that's reflected in real life. With violence against women, it's conducted 99.9% of the time by men, right? Are men inherently more evil than women? Jane?
Oh, nice, easy question. Thanks. Nothing controversial there. I didn't think so at all, but I think there's, and I've written characters who were female, who were the villains in my vast array of books. But I think it's about power, and it's about having the opportunity to be to have control over someone else. And I think, very often women who abuse children they're in a domestic environment. They have total control over that environment. Men tend to have more control over women in any environment because they tend to be bigger and stronger, and they have the opportunity in a way that they don't, that women don't tend to. So, I would never downplay violence against men. Men can be victims of violence too, but I just think it's to do with power and control and opportunity, and those are the three things that men tend to have more than women do. And I mean, you can write a very threatening female character. You can write someone who is terrifying, but they don't necessarily have to be physically terrifying. They can be psychologically terrifying. They can take control of a situation in a very different way, which again is, that's what every crime writer wants. You want to write an unforgettable character who is absolutely terrifying. And that's just as easy, I think, to do for a male character and a female character. But in the real world, I think it's so much of the time, crime is not terribly interesting. It's very sad and it's very brutal and it's opportunistic, and it's not, something that lends itself particularly well to fiction. So, we kind of reflect the real world, but I don't think we can take what happens in the real world and put it into fiction and expect that to be a satisfying story for anyone.
I think that's a very important.
Yeah, and further to that, you're absolutely right about the sort of opportunity that men have to be violent, but also it's more of their go-to historically. For thousands of years, men have been fighting over land or women or religion or whatever, and it is their go-to. But I think with women, the go-to isn't, well, I'll thump that person or I'll strangle that person. It isn't the go-to. The go-to is vocal quite often, and to soothe and to add chaos. So I think there are differences. It's such a big question about who, the level of evil. Certainly, there's no question about the level of crime. That it's definitely more, the majority is male, but the pattern of who is more evil is entirely, as Jane said, is about opportunity, or perhaps because we do have more complex vocal alternatives, we talk things out and don't feel we need to kill each other all the time. So.
Well, I think you both make really important points there, particularly when you take it into fiction. And now we're going through a phase where, rightly, women have come to the fore in crime fiction. Most of psychological noir, the successful psychological noir, is written by women with female protagonists, and that is correcting an imbalance in many decades where men had ruled the. But when you think about some of the villainous characters, I think you're quite right, both of you, that women bring a different dimension to it. So, for instance, if I were to ask you, would Silence of the Lambs have worked with Hannibal Lecter as a woman? What would you say to that? Female cannibal, would it work?
Not as well. I mean, I'm sure men would be scared, but I think there is there is a lot of physicality there. There's just a lot of physicality, which I think is part of what you're talking about. And so I think that I can't imagine it. I can't flip it in my head. Now I feel that's a challenge and I need to go and write that, swapping the gender. New project. Jane, what do you think?
I was thinking about this one, and I was thinking about Villanelle in Killing Eve. And she's such a tremendous character. She's so she just manifests threat all the time. Like, that she's always going to win any fight that she's in. And I think that's the power of the Hannibal Lecter character, that he is, he's 10 steps ahead of everyone else and he's quicker than everyone else. And for so much of Silence of the Lambs, he's behind bars and he's restrained, and, all of his malevolence is psychological. So there's no reason why that couldn't be a female character. And then when you look at Villanelle, I sort of think maybe we're slightly more on her side. Then it's easier for her to win us over than it is for a monster like Hannibal Lecter to be somebody that we want to win. I was thinking about, the beginning of the second series of Killing Eve, when she finds herself being helped by a man who ends up trying to attack her, and who's obviously a very sinister person. And you were just thinking, oh, well, wait, you're going to get yours. Like, this is, as he becomes more and more threatening, you're just thinking, oh, this is going to be good. And it is good. It's very satisfying when he is put in his place by her. But about the previous episode, he's murdered someone horribly.
I just think, isn't it interesting that she is a killer, but from the beginning you said, oh, she's so tremendous. And I was like, yes, she is. And I felt that sort of excitement, but she's a killer. So why do we feel excitement about female killers? Is it because really we don't really think that threatening, or they're a novelty, or, in itself, that's a kind of feminist issue? We should be terrified of her. She should horrify us. She should sicken us the way we would be terrified and horrified and sickened if it was a man doing the things she does. But for some reason, we're not. We think, oh, she dresses well and she's fabulous and she's so sexy and beautiful. So maybe she would have to be, to do the Hannibal Lecter thing, maybe she would not have to be young and beautiful and sexy. And, for us to feel, let's take a gender out of it and let's just see the threat she is, which I think is interesting.
I think she's charming. And that's the thing, like, she's charming and she's funny. And I think Hannibal Lecter is sometimes charming and funny in some of the versions of him that there are out there. So, we are kind of drawn to people who break the rules.
I was Googling deadly women just for this panel. And I came
not
across
as a hobby.
Well, no, not as a hobby. No, that's what I do before breakfast every morning. And I came across apparently she's considered the deadliest woman of all time. A lady called the Countess Elizabeth Báthory. She's an old Hungarian royal from the 19th century who was accused by many, many witnesses of murdering hundreds of young women and children. And she's the person where that old legend of a royal woman bathing in the blood of virgins came from, and may even have inspired the tales around Dracula. Truly horrible kind of woman. So I thought, this, when you get to that level of evil, it doesn't really matter if you're a man or a woman. It does not remain attractive in any way, shape, or form. But let's flip this. Let's flip this now. Let's talk about 9 qualities of women, and those are the main reasons why they end up as the leads in so much fictional narrative now. Who's your favorite fictional lead? Can be crime, can be non-crime.
As in a deadly woman, or
no, it doesn't have to be. Just a female narrative, a fictional character that's inspired you, maybe even when you were younger.
Okay, there's a couple from very old school books. So, Daniel Defoe wrote a female. I can't remember the name. It starts with, I think she's called Rosamund Roxanne. I think it is Roxanne. I can't remember. Anyway, I will think that will come to me by the end of this session. But she's a criminal. It's set in the 17th century. It was written in the 18th century, and she sort of thieves because she's hungry, and she's a prostitute, and she gets shipped abroad, and she starts up businesses that are relatively dodgy. She has children that she leaves. She's not a good bird. She makes mistakes, but she's very funny, and she's surviving in a world that is not set up for her to thrive in. And I really enjoy her, and I really enjoy Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, which is not anywhere near a crime book, but again, she's quite. She thinks she knows more than she does. She's very flawed. She interferes with people's lives. There's something it's not a psychological thriller, but Emma is a psychological romance, I guess. I've just made up a genre. But she manipulates people. She thinks she can control who should marry who, which is one of the biggest decisions we'll ever make in our lives. And Emma thinks she knows better than everybody else around her. And I find that really hilarious and exciting and fun. So I think in sort of past novels, there's always been this sort of little acorn of women kind of going, I'm not quite comfortable in that role you've given me, in that neat, tidy, law-abiding, sweet female role. And I'm just going to send out some little sparks and fireworks. And those two of the women that come to mind. Although not coming to mind enough if I can't remember my the heroine I like's name, but it'll come back to me. What about you, Jane?
I was going to say all of the female characters in Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier, because I think they cover such a wide range of, there's Rebecca herself, who obviously doesn't appear in the novel. She's fascinating. She's kind of monstrous. There's Mrs. Danvers, who's obviously everybody, remembers her, and her very malevolent sort of relationship with the second Mrs. De Winter, and then this nameless narrator who's sort of the victim of the whole thing. And I think the reason that Rebecca is still such a fascinating book for so many people and a favourite novel for so many people is because they're really complicated characters. They have really interesting motivations. They're not straightforward at all. I mean, I was thinking when we were talking about male characters and female characters, I always think, like, if you could sum up your character with one of those greetings cards from the supermarket where, it's like a, Happy Father's Day or whatever, and it's like golf clubs and beer, and, then you haven't written a good character. And those Rebecca characters are so fascinating to me and so endlessly interesting, because they're not straightforward, and you couldn't possibly begin to sum them up. People can have 2-hour-long discussions about what they meant when they said this, or what did they intend to happen. You can read into it and turn it around and look at it the other way. I think that's pure genius. And the other one was The Secret History, all the characters in that, and the kind of the wide range of different things that motivate them and how they interact with one another. I just find it fascinating. Those are my two sort of, as books about character, I think they're unbeatable, those two.
Well, you both touch on the fact that you're looking at female characters who are quite twisty, and that takes me back to your books, Adele. With your two lead characters, we have a twist that comes third of the way through, which is terrific, and it realigns our perspectives. How important is it? It's a question for both of you to have, within the context of your books, you could possibly explain, to have adversaries for your lead characters who are either male or female. Do you side with, so if you're having a lead character that's a female, do you automatically feel that the main adversary has to be a male?
I don't, not at all. I mean, I do know who my main adversary is right at the beginning, because I'm quite the plotter. So my books do have reveals and twists and turns and unreliable narrators, and you think you're going in one direction and then you're not. But I don't want any of those twists or turns to be farcical. I don't want you to, as a reader, become irritated or lose patience or just say, oh, that can't happen. Although none of this is something you would want to happen in your life or anybody else's, I want you to believe that it could happen. So I plot very carefully, and I think not all psychological thrillers are plotted, but many are, because as the authors, we have to put our characters in a position where they are steps ahead of other characters, of the reader. So there is a lot to commit to. And I like it to be the case that you get to the end of the book and go, right, okay, I saw some of that coming, didn't see it all coming. Now I'm going to reread it and see where the clues are that she left for me, which I always will have left clues. So I knew, and I can't tell you, but I knew who was the villain when I set off. And so what I had to do was give the reader an array of people that could be responsible for these women's disappearances. And even in my introduction, I have left it vague for you. I'm like, did they run away from something, which is, a possibility? Did they run towards something, which people can then go, ooh, maybe they did. And what would that be? or were they taken? Because that is often the case. If anything, I think the thing I concern myself with when I'm writing psychological thrillers with women, deadly women, or women that might find themselves dead, I am quite careful about a sort of responsibility towards gratuitously putting a woman at risk, whether that's, whether she's at risk because somebody, male or female, is putting her at risk. I don't necessarily want to keep perpetuating that situation that we know is a reality and that we all feel horribly uncomfortable with and know is wrong. So I think I'm very careful about that. Although obviously I actually do mentally and emotionally torture my characters. I mean, I don't like physically torture them yet, but I don't treat them well. So there's a lot to be thinking about. But the one thing I don't think about is whether there should be a gender reversal of, if this person is in danger, then it must be someone of the opposite gender that's put them in danger. I think that's, well, obviously I'm glad I said that, because otherwise that would halve the chances of who it could be in this book. Jane, what do you think?
Well, because I usually write the Maeve Kerrigan series, which are police procedurals. They sort of have their own structure. They have their own kind of logic. And one of the things is that, the stakes are very high for them professionally. And the thing with a standalone like The Killing Kind is that stakes are high for Ingrid personally, which is something that I hadn't really dealt with since I did write one standalone before. My first book was a standalone called The Missing. It came out in 2010. And then I just immerse myself in the police procedural world. And because there's that slight remove between the professional and the personal, I think it's very different to have someone targeting you directly. Now, I do put my police characters into harm's way. And obviously, it's all very high stakes. And that's what we're all trying to do, is make it exciting and tell an exciting story. But telling a story where there's a personal element to why they're being targeted is very different and very challenging. And I think plotting The Killing Kind was probably the hardest thing I've ever done, because there are so many moving parts and there's so many little details and there's so many revelations, and it doesn't follow that classic 3-act structure that we get told is the ideal way to tell a story, because there's so many places where there's a turn or a twist or a reversal or something that you thought you understood, you then don't understand quite the way that you thought you did. And it was just like, it's great fun to write it. I think I wouldn't narrow it down to sort of, here's a woman confronting a man, or here's, this person needs to be. It's more exciting to vary it, and for somebody to be an enemy and then a friend, or a friend and then an enemy, and to be untrustworthy. I think that's the essence of it.
You've identified something there for me that really, I'm very excited. It makes me think about my books in a different way, because you've identified that your dilemma, because of writing police procedural, has come from a professional point of view. And I realized, I was going through it in my head, I've never done that. Another challenge for me. God, I'm going to have a busy afternoon.
Well,
I'm going to have such a busy afternoon. I mean, I do have police in it, but it always comes from a really personal point of view. All my psychological thrillers, and so that's just given me something really meaty to think about. Thank you.
Look, having read both of them, both of you, by you, Adele, and The Killing Kind, I can certainly say that you've both layered these novels with so much plot and twists and texture, and multiple suspects, which is always a good thing. And it did keep me reading right until the end to work out exactly. And I have to admit that I did not. I had inklings, but I couldn't quite work it out. Who was the principal villain for us to look at. Okay, maybe one more question before we open the floor to questions. Would the world be a better place if it was run by women? Now, I know that my wife would certainly say so. And, if she were a serial killer and Hannibal Lecter, I would be the first person on the menu. But would the world be a better place if it was run by women?
Quick answer is yes.
I would say, ooh, controversial.
I know. I'm too old to worry what people think of me anymore. I do think, yeah. I mean, we'd probably be overpopulated because there'd be a lot less wars. There's far fewer wars and a lot less killing. So we'd probably have different issues. How about the world would be a better place if it was run 50-50 and it was balanced? I'd go for that. That would still seem like a goal right now.
No, too late. No, you can't take it back. It's too late. Adele Parks says all men should be sacked from any position of responsibility, given a dummy, and told to sit in the corner. We'll have less wars because. Well, okay, you can't go back now. What about you?
I think it's kind of amazing that in a world where it's 51% female and 49% male, women are a minority and are seen as a minority in political terms. And so, big pat on the back for having like 2 women in cabinet who are two ministers who are women. It just seems insane to me that it's not equal and that there's no feeling that it should be equal, and that, even the slightest hint of equality is something that some men have a big problem with, and they don't think that it should be that way. They're used to how it has always been, and they don't see any reason to change that, and I can understand that. But I just think equal would be better.
Isn't it? I mean, isn't that all wrapped up, not just in historical reasons, but in tradition and religion? Certainly in many parts of the world and we've just seen the horrible case of Afghanistan, where the Taliban have taken over, and any progress that might have been made on female rights has, it's gone backwards. It doesn't matter what they're saying in public. We all know what the reality is probably going to be. I mean, probably shouldn't get this political in this session, but I tend to agree with Adele. I think the world would be a much safer and more pleasant place if it was run by competent, intelligent people who are more often than not women, except that they've never been given the chance to lead countries. We have examples around the world. Women have been given the chance and have more than proved adequate to the task.
It goes back to Jane's quite early point about opportunity, and you're wrapping it up really well there, because physically, again, historically, the way you got land was clubbing someone to death next to you and taking their land. And that was more likely to happen if you were physically bigger than the person next to you. So men took that role. Took the role of being violent towards their neighbors and extending borders that way. And women never had that role. So, and also they would carry babies. So there was that thing of, I've actually got this baby nesting in me for 9 months. I'm just going to take it steady, because actually my biggest concern is having this baby safe and healthy. So there's so many sort of different things that we've had for so long. But it would because of that, we had to find other ways, going back to this sort of communication business. We found other ways to make things happen. So now we're not clubbing each other to death across the globe, although some are. We're not clubbing each other to death to make our points. So maybe there is now the time to go, well, there's other qualities that people have been developing, but just female people have been developing. Maybe bring those ones in. I don't know.
Right, Sam is...
I am back. Thank you, Vaseem. That was they're brilliant questions and fantastic answers coming up too. We could actually talk here for ages. I have a few questions from the floor, so I'm just going to get to those. Jane, one of the first questions that's come up is for you, and it's about switching. I know The Missing was a first standalone, then obviously you went into the series books. How did you find switching to writing a standalone? Because you're coming from a series where you know everybody so well, and they're literally, it's like, I was thinking when I wrote a series, it was like walking into a bar with your friends because you knew everybody. How did you find switching and developing those characters for the standalone?
Well, initially I was very excited about doing it, and then I discovered it was a lot more challenging than I had expected it would be. So it was lovely to have the freedom to structure the story differently and to bring in new characters and to develop them. But I did miss my series characters, and I missed that sort of world. And I've just written The 10th Maeve Kerrigan, and it was so lovely to get back to her after having this kind of adventure with Ingrid. Who's a very different kind of character. But yeah, it was very, it was a challenge. It was a challenging book to write and to get my head around and to plot and to think about, purely because it was the proper blank page.
Yeah. Yeah, and lots of intricate detail. You mentioned that earlier. There's a lot of little bits and pieces and a lot of detail in that. In the book, I just loved it. It's fantastic. Adele, for you, have you ever thought about writing a series?
Well, I honestly have so many thoughts a day that I think I'm coming away from this session with 3 new books to tackle. I haven't thought of writing a series, but there are 3 of my novels, Lies, 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 Young Wives' Tales, and Playing Away, that have the same characters in them.
They connect. Yeah.
They're all standalone, and in fact, they spread across 2 genres. What's that about? So, Playing Away was my debut novel. It was about one woman, Connie, and she had 4 friends in the background. And then 7 years in real time and 7 years in fiction time, I picked up with 2 of those characters and told their story. And then a further 10 years after that, for Lies, 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 by that time writing psychological thrillers. I was writing about an alcoholic and thought, oh, hang on, I know something about alcoholics. And I remembered that I had a kind of hint that one of my characters way back when was on that path, but I never investigated it. He was a background character. And I pulled him to the forefront. Him and his wife who had appeared in these last 2 books, became the leads in Lies, Lies, Lies. So that gave me that lovely sense that Jane's just been talking about, that I knew all the background people in Simon and Daisy's life and in Lies, Lies, Lies. I knew all their friends already. And I knew how glitzy or not things had turned out for them, and therefore what sort of background challenges Daisy and Simon might have, being the least successful couple out of this group. And I found that great fun. I also think with both of you, this is kind of breaking news, but I think with both of you, I will be going back to that. I've said that out loud now. I'm looking around going, am I? But I think I'm going back to that. And certainly the DC, in that case, DC Clements. I love DC Clements. I loved writing about her. I love the fact Jane's got sort of on-tap expertise that she can, because I think that was the only difficulty for me when I was writing DC Clements. I absolutely loved writing her, but I didn't know what's fact or what I'm picking up from sort of Line of Duty and probably completely inaccurate. So I reached out to my readers and said, anybody work in the police force? Of course, loads of people do. But it was during lockdown. So I was, having lots of Zooms and calls and writing to people who really understand police procedure.
Make sure your detail is correct. Yeah, it's really interesting.
It would have been cheaper for you, for Jane to go to her readers, because her husband sent her a bill afterwards. It's what lawyers do. It's what lawyers do.
They do.
Every minute.
Seriously, on a serious point, it is amazing how willing people are to help you if you're writing something that is about their particular area of expertise. Like, people love talking about their work if they enjoy it, and they love telling you all the stuff that you don't know. And obviously I'm very lucky to have someone in my immediate vicinity who can answer most of my questions. But it's the same for any writer. You can reach out so easily, especially in this world of social media. People just were really desperate to help and to, be that insight.
I think that's actually the joy for me for standalones. I like being a different person each time. I like my characters having different jobs. I find out so much about either, as in careers or emotional things. I mean, I've asked readers before if they would help me with, I don't know, with things like alcoholism and living with alcoholism. And people, again, want to talk about that. It's not just they want to talk about their jobs because their jobs interest them. They want to talk about their pain and the things they've gone through, because that's important too. So for me,
detail right is important. Yeah.
So for me, I like the challenge of something new each time. It keeps it fresh for me. But as I say, I'm not ruling it out that I would write a series, or at least a duo.
You heard it here first. Vaseem, we've been talking there about challenges and about research and being able to ask people. When you set something in 1950s Bombay with a female protagonist, how did you even begin that? Why did you go with a female protagonist for the Malabar House series?
Well, I lived in Bombay for a decade in my 20s, and my first series was set in modern India. But once you live in a city for that long, you fall in love with it, and you want to know more about its past. And then, as a writer, you you feel instinctively that you want to showcase it in fiction. And for me, 1950 is a watershed moment in Indian history. We've had 300 years of a relationship with the British. In 1947, India achieved independence. So 1950 is just a couple of years after that. Gandhi's been assassinated. The horrors of partition and all the people who died because of partition are still lingering over the country. And that's never been an area that's been explored. We've had lots of books exploring the Raj, but we've had very, very few, whether they're crime or non-crime books, looking at that period just after, when India was trying to discover what kind of country she was going to be, what kind of democracy she was going to be. And at the time, she was the world's largest democracy. And then I thought, okay, so I'm going to put a police character into this. Who would be the most interesting police character? And I could have had a male character, but then I thought that's not as interesting as putting a woman in, because there were no female police detectives at the time. And this was an incredibly patriarchal, highly misogynistic environment. And to a certain extent, most people who live in India would argue that it's still quite patriarchal and reasonably misogynistic. So you can imagine what it was like in 1950. And Persis is a very, she's like the lead characters that these wonderful writers come up with. She's persistent, she's dogged, she's intelligent, and she hates the fact that men who are not as gifted as her or as qualified as her are given positions of superiority and refuse to allow her into the club. But so she ends up at Malabar House, which is Bombay's smallest police station, where all the misfits and the rejects are sent. And her only crime, of course, is that she's a woman and nobody wants to work with her. And then in Midnight at Malabar House, a very important case drops into her lap. A very senior British diplomat is murdered. And, away she goes. And the series carries on from that. So the real impetus was having someone who would butt heads with the men around her, because that makes for a much more interesting narrative, right?
Totally does. Yeah, I'm all over women characters. My books, my characters, and they do. There's a lot of butting of heads. I do like that. I do like a good feisty female. I'm just going to go around the three of you now and just ask you for just a couple of minutes on your writing day, because we're getting loads of questions from writers coming in about how you structure. You've mentioned plotting before, and I have secrets inside knowledge of how you all work. But Jane, let's start with you. How did you set out with The Killing Kind?
How do I begin, or how do I do it every day?
An insight into your writing, both, I suppose, but an insight into your writing day, and how does that mirror your process?
Well, I think every book begins without writing. So for me, I sort of sit and think about things for a long time before I actually get to write about them. I feel like I have to line up certain things imaginatively before I feel that the book is alive and that it will carry me through to the end, because it's an act of faith. Every time you start writing, you believe that you can tell this story and that it will end up being a satisfying story. And I have a rule that I always finish what I start. So even if I think it's terrible and I'm at 60,000 words and it's the worst thing ever, I will get to the end, because you can fix something that exists, but a half book is no good to anyone. So I don't write anything for a long time, and I will be working on other stuff and I'll have an idea in the back of my mind. And sometimes it's just waiting for that tiny little bit of detail to pop into my head and to make sense of the characters or the setting or the plot or whatever it is, that you just need that one thing to sort of spark the whole idea. And then it's just, you have to go and spend the time. You have to go and park yourself somewhere and put in the hours. And I've no idea what my hourly rate is. I'm sure it's horrendous if I worked it out. It's about 50p an hour for my efforts. But it's fun. That's the other thing. When you get into it and you're writing, it's a lovely thing. So yeah, I always plan, I think, and then I write.
Excellent. It's just so interesting. I think that, having that last bit, the thinking time is so important, and having that last little spark falling into place, that's often what happens, isn't it? It's nearly that key that comes in. I'm going to go around the screen. So Vaseem, you're next now. How is your writing day, and how do you spend a lot of time thinking and planning before you start?
Yeah, I do most of my writing in the morning when my brain is still working. As far as structuring a book is concerned, I tend to think in themes and in historical nuggets, things that you can hang hang a whole book off of. So if you take the second book in the Malabar House series, The Dying Day, and here's one I baked earlier. With this one, it starts with the theft of one of India's great treasures. It's a 600-year-old copy of Dante's The Divine Comedy. It's a real artifact. It's stored at Bombay's Asiatic Society, which is a treasure house of stuff that's the British built, and it's been there for a couple of hundred years. And the reason that was quite intriguing to me was because not only does this thing actually exist, and you can go and see it if you've got access to the vault, but it's caused a lot of angst over the past in terms of India's changing relationship post-independence. Mussolini tried to buy this manuscript for Italy, back for Italy for $1 million, but the Indian government refused, and they've had an argument ever since. And once Persis is called in to investigate, she discovers that the Englishman who's in charge of this, the curator at the Bombay Asiatic Society, he's also missing. So we use that as a device to examine this changing relationship and attitudes between Indians and the British, who have now departed. But they haven't really departed, because one of the things I learned while researching these books is that there are tens of thousands of foreigners, mainly Brits, who are still in the country, and they're helping India transition from being a colonial enterprise to this new country. So for me, those are the kind of things that I start planning right from the beginning. And then the crime narrative begins with the murder usually, and there are many murders in this, and then it flows backwards. And then with this particular one, I spent a lot of time, more than I had anticipated, trying to create riddles, because there are clues that are left as riddles, which she then has to follow as she progresses behind this manuscript. And I wish I hadn't tried to make them rhyme as well, because that really took too much time, effort, and energy. But anyway, it was all fun.
It all works. That's the important thing. It's a fantastic book. Adele, for you, is it a similar type of process, or how do you?
Yeah, I think both of those things. I'm like Jane, that I spend a lot of time thinking, literally months before I will put, I say pen to paper, obviously fingers to keyboard, but I need to be desperate to write before I start writing. And I'm in that phase now. So book 22 is already written. And so I'm doing things I've done the editing, we're looking at covers, I'm doing, promotion of book 21, but I need to start. And I am thinking about book 23. And I know I'm very close. I'm really close. I've got the idea. I've started to work on the plots and the characters, but I'm holding back. I'm constantly asking myself, and what happens next? And then what happens next? So that I will get myself to the end of the book in terms of plotting, so that by the time I actually start writing, I'm desperate to get going. And then it will fly, and it will fly, I hope. It will fly in the mornings. To Vaseem's point, I write better in the mornings too. I tend to do much more sort of admin in the afternoon. I mean, I would say I'm a full-time writer. I would always say I'm a full-time writer. I clearly am. I'm not doing anything else. But I don't write from 9 till 5. I do something to do with writing 9 till 5, but my writing day is 1,000 to 2,000 words, which I can usually do in the mornings, and then in the afternoons it's contracts, social media, covers, marketing, that sort of thing.
I think there's a lot in. It's very clear it's coming through. There's a lot in the writing process, and the thinking time is vitally important in that writing process. Which is fantastic, and because you've all produced the most amazing books. I mean, they are 3 really, really, really super strong books. Thank you so much. That was so interesting. What a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to our guests, and a huge thank you to Dunleary-Rathdown Libraries and the fabulous LexIcon Library in Dunleary for helping or for bringing Murder One in the library to you. As I mentioned at the start, we've got a fantastic series of events. This is just the first, and also a series of crime writing masterclasses that are going to be very exciting. And we're really looking inside the best crime novels that are out at the moment. Tomorrow night, I'm with Dublin Book Festival, and I am talking to 3 different crime writers who are in 3 different time zones and 3 different cities of literature. Obviously, I'm in Dublin, and in Dublin, coming from Dublin City of Literature. So that's a great one. That's tomorrow evening with the Dublin Book Festival. So do register there. And do join us for the rest of our events. We've got some great stuff coming up, and check out the other events. and stick with us for Murder One in the library. Thank you very much indeed, guys.
Thanks
Thank
for
you, Sam.
inviting us.